Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Welcome to the Go News Australia podcast. It's the podcast for Australian shooters who just want the political interference taken out of shooting.
Welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded at Gun Traders Australia. And you can get all our episodes by subscribing to us on our YouTube channel and using the link below. You'd be well aware that the West Australian Parliamentary Committee that's reviewing the Firearms Act over there has held its hearings and in recent days handed down its final report. And a link to that report is in the description to this video. I want to say thank you to the Liberal Party's Nick Gorin for moving the motion that was passed to get the review into the Firearms Act underway. Now, out of that, most reports that come out of Parliament or other government processes, they will be diving deeply into issues, so they'll pick the good and the bad, and there'll be a whole lot of stuff in the middle, and then there'll be recommendations and findings at the end. Which is why I usually don't like using labels like whitewash to describe these processes, because they're often quite complex. This report, though, has been described by others as a whitewash, and it's a very rare thing for me to say, but I actually do agree that this particular report was a whitewash. I'm going to look at this in a couple of different ways. One is to just quickly look at some words and phrases that were used in the report, and then I'm going to take you to some findings on it. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's, this is a 200 whatever page report. It's going to take way too long. There will be a couple of follow-up sessions or episodes on the report later on. But for now, I just want to give you a bit of a high-level view of as to what it's like. Just having a look at some key phrases. The report used the word justified, as in that, this restriction is justified on the basis of doing something else. They used that 78 times. They used the phrase public safety, as in to say this restriction is needed for public safety. They used that 61 times in the report without ever explaining what they mean by public safety or why it's even relevant in some contexts. So, for example, crossing state borders with a firearm and license, why is that even a public safety issue? It makes no sense. They provided no statistics and no data to back those sort of claims. So they were not to a good start, I've got to say. Firearms legislation really is meant to be there to, one, facilitate lawful activities, whether it's target shooting, hunting, farming, whatever it is, and to balance that up against other objectives, one of which is public safety. And that can also relate to the use and put down penalties for the misuse of firearms and illegal possession of firearms, the sort of things that criminals do. Yet the word criminals appears once in the entire report. And even then it came from a blurb that was copied and pasted from a submission by West Australian Police. They mentioned criminals once. The committee did not mention them at all. So their focus was never on public safety or crime. It was always on restrictions. There was recognition of firearm owners in different permutations in the report. But the whole thing, the whole report, the way that it was so weighted towards, justifying restrictions, it's
the Constitution, it's Mabo, it's justice, it's law, it's the vibe, and no, that's it, it's the vibe.
Joining a Patreon channel means you'll see episodes of Gun News Australia as soon as they come out, which means you'll see them before they're released more widely. Plus, we release weekly updates exclusively for members and supporters of Politics Reloaded. It's a great way to support our work while getting the news you want to hear. So sign up now on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Politics Reloaded. So getting into the body of the report, on page 10, the committee said, The committee was extremely mindful of the fact, for example, that family violence or domestic abuse need not be just physical abuse, but includes intimidating behaviour or coercive conduct. The mere presence of a firearm in premises shared with the person exhibiting that sort of behaviour is in itself of great concern. Now, they are basing that on evidence provided by some community safety groups, couple related to dedicated to dealing with family violence, and I recall that this was based on a statement relating to an individual who had beaten his wife up. He had a firearm. He was also on parole at the time. Now, if you're on parole at the time, there's a very, very, very high likelihood you did not hold that firearm legally. There was no mention of that in this case. It was never tied back to a licensed gun owner. So that finding or that statement, again, is agnostic to the fact that there are criminals and other people out there who don't obey the law. So why the committee completely disregarded that, I don't know. There are quite a lot of statements made in the report that were just fictional, including picking up on a statement by a vet who apparently was sanctioning the use of 22 Hornets to euthanise large animals up to and including bulls. Now, I challenge any member of that West Australia Parliamentary Committee to go up to a 500 kilogram or 600 kilogram bull with a 22 Hornet and say, "Hey, buddy, I'm going to use this on you to euthanise you." You will not end up well. So, in all, there were 46 findings, 11 recommendations, and most of those recommendations relate to what the police should do to support the implementation of the laws, and a lot of it's to do with communication. That's basically it. That's basically what the committee recommended, not to fix anything in the Act or the regulations, but that's what the report. That's what the committee did. It really, I think, demonstrates WA Parliament's alternate reality.
I mean, how can all this be happening? It's like we're in hell or something.
No, it's Hill Valley, although I can't imagine hell being much worse.
Now, there was some dissent on some of the findings among committee members, not to the point where the committee wouldn't proceed with a particular finding, but obviously there were a couple of people on the committee who wanted to speak up but weren't able to. They lost. Basically, they were bulldozed by the majority government committee. A couple of the issues that I was really disappointed in how they were dealt with was the issue of the interstate license recognition. Now, the evidence given at the hearings by West Australia Police was that it's not an issue, and of course that's having to fork out $133 to cross the WA border, when in fact WA is a signatory to the National Firearms Agreement, which requires mutual recognition of licenses. So West Australia remains an outlier, and I'm stunned that did not wind up as a recommendation of this committee. It's a stark divergence from the NFA, but also something that makes perfect sense, because if you want to drive interstate, your Victoria, New South Wales, whatever license is recognised, and if you're not moving there, you're just staying there for a few days and heading back. But they won't do that with firearm licenses. The other issue that I think is of major concern is the fact that it did not address the issue of facilitating juniors in sport. That is, recommend licensing of juniors from 12 up. That posed a whole lot of issues about the future of the sport, but also, again, these international competition aspects. And a big part of the reason why some of these issues remain unchallenged is because the committee did not invite Shooting Australia to give evidence. And I've said this before, Shooting Australia is the Australian arm, for want of a better word, of the Australian Olympic Committee in relation to shooting. So it's the funnel to go from entering the shooting sports right through to the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games and World Cups, World Championships. You want to do that, you go through Shooting Australia, which is made up of shotgun rifle associations and the like, In fact, we interviewed Murray Bowe from the West Australian Shooting Association on this not long ago, and the video is the link to it is on the top of the screen. The importance of this isn't just for shooters in WA. It's also for shooters in other states, because we have seen registries in those other states try to bring in other restrictions. They do get together and have meetings and agreed policy outcomes at the Firearms and Weapons Policy Working Group. As I said, there are meetings of the registries. They meet a couple of times a year, and you might recall that I've put in freedom of information requests for their outputs because I want to see what they've agreed on. And at the moment, we're in the Australian Review Tribunal to get that for you. So don't think that this problem stops at the WA border. It's an issue for Australian shooters, especially with the 30th anniversary of the National Firearms Agreement coming up. You can bet that the anti-gun people will be having a crack at trying to get things changed their way. Show your support for shooting with our mouse pads, which feature pistol, rifle and shotgun shooting, and they come in two sizes. There's the regular size, which is 205 by 145mm, and the new large size, which is 230 by 190. And they can be yours for just $20 for the regular size, or $25 for the large, or $7 or $12 if you're a supporter of Politics Reloaded. And all prices include express post delivery. So to get yours, just drop us a line with the size you want and your delivery address to edit@politicsreloaded.com, or use the QR code on the screen. Now, I did invite the chair of the committee, Katrina Stratton, onto my program to take us through the rationale for this. And when I wrote to her, I said, look, to be perfectly honest, I'm not going to be asking any Dorothy Dixes. I'll be asking some hard questions because there are different views on this. To her credit, she responded the same day. So it wasn't her office. It was, Katrina. So thank you very much for the response. She has declined. A part of the reason she gave is that the report's going to be debated in Parliament over the next few weeks. And yeah, I get that. I'm not going to hold my breath on her coming back to me later on to appear on the Gun News Australia, but look, the door's open. And as I said, I will ask hard questions. I'll be fair, but I will ask those questions. Now, I guess the bad news for West Australian shooters is that the only way this can really be fought is at a political level. I know others have gone down the path of trying to fight the gun laws in some jurisdiction, but Parliament's role is to make the laws, and unless you can find some constitutional grounds or show the laws were not made validly, you're going to be pushing it uphill. So I maintain that there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, it's a very long tunnel because the next state election in WA is 2029. However, there are things that can be done between now and then, and I'm working with others at the moment on that. But one thing that you can do if you are a shooter in WA is forget about what's happened. Go to your local member of Parliament and tell them that you're a shooter, you hate the new gun laws, you think that the review was blatant whitewashing by Labor, and you will vote against politicians who do not take the right view on gun laws, which means you need to basically push up against that. Now, we know that Labor and Liberal MPs generally won't take that line, but you let them know that you will vote on the issue, that you're a one-issue voter. They may not understand the issue. They may not like gun. That doesn't matter. What they understand are numbers. And it's the nature of politics that they sometimes have to, grin and bear it when it comes to issues they may not actually agree on. And firearms is one of them. And what we need to do is to demonstrate to both sides of Parliament that there are shooters out there and they will vote on this issue, because the West Australian government has made it an issue. Okay, if they hadn't touched the gun laws, if they had have left that 1973 Act, as bad as it was anyway, if they had left it alone, then firearms would be much, much, much lower in terms of the issues on their radar. Our job is to make sure it stays high on the radar. As I said, 3.5 years away. Yeah, I know, I get that. I know people will lose their guns in the meantime and all that sort of stuff. I get that. But make it political and get heard now. Don't wait. Don't wait till, not 2029, before you make your voice known. Anyway, out of this, my expectation is that if shooters can get politically organised, and they were organised at the last state election, by the way, it's just that Labor still had a big majority out of the from the election, which was a hangover of the super big majority that they had at the election before. So they did lose votes. It didn't really go to the Liberals, though. It went a little bit to the National Party, but it went to other parties as well. Why? Because the Liberals are weak. As I said, there's a couple of Liberal MPs in there who are worth their weight. Nick Duran, there's Phil Twiss, from both from the Libs. So I think the winner out of that actually will probably end up being One Nation, because the Libs don't want the shooters' vote. Then okay, we'll find someone else. There was some other findings and statements made in the report that I'm going to draw your attention to. Now, I will be coming back to the report in more detail later on, but the idea of this episode is just to give you a bit of a flavour of what the whole thing was about. Finding number 26. The Firearms Act 2024 and Firearms Regulations 2024. Now, just on that, I know people have said, no, the regulations are 2025 and all that sort of stuff. I am just taking what the report said here, so don't come back to me with the dates because, as I said, this is from the committee. It says that the Act and those regulations have sufficient regard to Aboriginal tradition and island custom in terms of allowing for traditional hunting rights and practices. I'll be coming back to that also in another episode, but those who followed the evidence would have heard from Aboriginal land managers that, in fact, that is so far from the truth that the new laws actually trample over traditional Aboriginal hunting rights and practices. That was very, very clear. And in fact, one of the elders at one of the hearings was visibly annoyed. I was going to use a different phrase there, but she was really, this is the sort of person who you'd think the government would have, wanted to make sure wasn't affected. Anyway, so finding number 20, the provisions of the Firearms Act 2024 and Firearms Regulations 2024 regarding hunting permission for land do not unduly limit opportunities for hunters and do not constitute a restriction on pest control measures in the state. Well, tell that to the hunters. Tell that to the hunters who've lost firearms because of that number 5, that 5 gun limit or whatever it is, or having to not use particular calibers or types of rifles. Of course it does. Finding number 18. No evidence has been produced to show that shooting clubs are closing in Western Australia and other that having to cope with administrative load, they are not adversely affected by the Firearms Act 2024 or the Firearms Regulations 2024. Garbage. Go back to the hearings, dear committee. Go back to the submissions. They provided evidence, clear evidence that was the case. Of course, clubs are affected by this admin burden. It's a burden which was already on top of a bad set of burden from the 1973 Act. So for the committee to pretty much just dust that away, that's pretty disgraceful. The finding 19 is the capacity of West Australia to host national or international shooting events is not adversely affected by the Firearms Act 2024 or the Firearms Regulations 2024. Garbage. Try holding another Commonwealth Games or even Olympic Games shooting event, okay? The laws, as I said, they already trample over the requirement of the National Firearms Agreement to provide for mutual recognition of licenses. It means if you're coming from interstate or overseas or wherever, you're going to need a $133 permit from West Australian Police, which does nothing. There was clear evidence given that, in fact, they do impact on those, made worse by the fact the committee did not have Shooting Australia there to give evidence. Now, Shooting Australia, I've said this before, is the funnel to get from clubs to the Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, World Cups, World Championships and the like. Why were they not asked to give evidence. And on that, he was absolutely ignorant of the committee to do it. And I interviewed, again, Murray Bowe from the West Australian Shooting Association who spoke on that. Now, you really have to wonder as to how the committee got that information. The report very clearly misses the mark. It tells fibs in terms of what the impacts are. It's completely oblivious to everything that you have been saying. But anyway, we're going to be coming back and doing a bit more work on this report a little bit later on. But for now, that's it. So look, thank you for your time, and we will see you later. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gun News Australia, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're a supporter through Patreon, you'll get access to early release of the episodes as soon as they're uploaded, as well as the special weekly updates. So to support our work, simply go to patreon.com/politics reloaded, or use the QR code on the screen, or see the description in this episode for details.